pentagram dedicated to Henry
It's
Ford.
the economy, stupid. It's the economy, stupid. Well, that's 2 podcasts in a row that I've recorded over the last couple of days where I've said the same thing. It's a quote by a man called James Carville, who was part of the Democratic Party in the USA, part of Bill Clinton's campaign. It became one of his slogans. And still pretty resonant, I think. And also, it's just a handy thing to say, seeing as we've just had an election. Maybe you noticed. Well, I'm going to talk about the underground scene, about the music industry, about where it is after having just completed another year, another trip around the sun, another circuit, so to say, another notch on the bedpost, another, look, call it what you want, but it's year 30 something or other of Primordial, and year 20 something or other of traveling, touring, playing gigs, festivals, and I thought it would be a really interesting moment to just kind of take a little look, take stock of where the underground scene might be at this moment. So, Agitators Anonymous, let's do it. So before we get into the episode, as ever, the podcast is sponsored by Metal Blade Records, the home of Primordial. So you can go to www.metalblade.indiemerch.com, INDIE, metalblade.indiemerch.com, and you can use the code AA2024, and then you type 10% off, and you can get 10% off your order. It is the home of Show No Mercy, Hell Awaits, Cannibal Corpse, Fate's Warning, Merciful Fate, Primordial, tons and tons of bands, Sirith Ungol. The list is endless. Times are tough, and that 10% off can mean an awful lot. And this is the only metal label that is still independent. Right then, now back to the episode. Also, if you wish to follow me on Instagram, it's nemthianga_primordial and primordial_official. If you want to go over to my Patreon, it's patreon.com/Alan Averill, AVERILL. It's a Norman name. Allegedly, it means the man who shall conquer in April. There you go. A few months left before we get to that. Well, now. So, this summer we played quite a lot of festivals with Primordial, maybe even almost 20, maybe creeping over 20. I haven't really kept count. We also went to America for the first time in a long time. So it's been quite a busy year, and I think from Poland to Spain to Portugal to Germany to Sweden, we've been quite a few places, and I've been able to have a little look into, as I said, the economy, stupid. And I think that that's the first thing to note. That's really the first thing to note about where the underground and the metal scene is right now. And that is, even though traditionally the metal scene has always been a couple of years behind most other forms of music. Vinyl was making its last stand in the underground metal scene before it had a resurgence. People in the metal scene are still buying CDs. Actually, CDs are kind of making a comeback, but I'll get to that shortly, the reason why. The reason is perhaps more banal than you might imagine, but everything is downstream of the economy. And whether anybody likes it or not, we are still in the slipstream of the lockdown COVID period, where more money was printed than ever in the previous 80 years or whatever it was. And so, inflation 101, the worth of money just altered. It was incredible to go to the United States in April and see the insane, I hadn't been in maybe 5 years, the insane difference in the prices was just wild. I think Australia might be the most expensive country I've ever visited with the band, along with Norway and Iceland. But America creeping up there. And it's becoming similar in Ireland. I just went to see Nick Cave and the beers were €8. And you know that in 9 months, they're just going to be a flat 10. That's just going to be how it is. Everything that is, the live experience, it's becoming a luxury item. And that's kind of the ticket masterization of the scene. But I'm going to get into it. Everything is downstream of the economy. And that's really affecting the underground metal scene because maybe 10, 12, 14 years ago, you could post a vinyl from Ireland to Germany for €5, €6, maybe even less, maybe €4. Now that's going to be 12, 14. The wholesale of the vinyl to you is more expensive, sometimes over 10, 11, €12. The packaging is more expensive. Every single thing. And look, I don't need to tell you, you're living in the world, you're living out there. You've probably on your way to work this morning, you've noticed the coffee just went up another 30 cents since last week. Just the way it is. Everything just keeps going up and up and up. And this is what's happening. The metal scene, the music industry is downstream of that. And so one of the biggest things I noticed is just festivals and festival culture in the metal scene. When you look in from the outside, it looks really strong. And I suppose it kind of is. There are festivals everywhere all summer. But they're increasingly becoming, unless they're very boutique and very niche, they're increasingly becoming, spring break for metal people. Now, there's nothing wrong with that. You want to go to a gig and enjoy yourself or whatever. But they're increasingly becoming less the home of musical fanatics or obsessives or people who are really there to see specific bands, but people who are just there to drink a beer and have a good time. And they're not buying merch. This is one of the biggest takeaways of the whole summer. I think every band I spoke to, every band we played with, from like Suffocation to Electric Wizard to all points in between, were just saying, by and large, they're selling 75% less merch. And merch is the lifeblood of bands. If you don't have your card reader, you're also at a disadvantage. But don't forget, a card reader means that there's no more, how can we say, money under the table. Everything has to be above board, of course, and you end up being traced and taxed. And look, I mean, of course you should be paying tax. We do pay tax. But it just means that everything has become sort of more corporatized. And this is, as I said, the Ticketmasterization of the scene. Ticketmaster and Live Nation have just bought up all these venues, even the smallest ones, dictating what goes on and all of the prices. But to come back to where I was, I'm easily distracted. You know this. You know this by now on episode 230 something about my random all over the place stream of consciousness. Because I do this, my friends, without notes. I just sit here, stare out the window and just randomly ramble. Anyway, so after lockdown, after COVID ended, an awful lot of venues and bars just found it very difficult to survive. And I think what's happened is that the sort of grassroots, the spit and sawdust bar or venue, people's socializing changed. People just don't go out as much anymore. And this is closing small bars and venues, the kind of 75 to 150 size venues that were the lifeblood of, van touring. I did a tour report of the recent couple of shows Dread Sovereign did over on my Patreon about it. And van touring, like to 50 to 100 people, is really becoming almost financially untenable. And that is because the cost of everything, the cost of gas, the cost of energy, the cost of petrol, the cost of hiring a van compared to 8 or 9 years ago is wild. And everybody who hires it then wants €300 a day because that's the going rate for crew. So you can see how everything is just downstream of, well, basically of COVID, of lockdown. Still, whether we like it or not, it changed the world we live in forever. And I would argue that, if this blip on our society, our culture, our humanity had never happened, then possibly you wouldn't be paying the same prices you are for everything if we just kept rolling on as we were. It's arguable. But of course, as I said, you print more money and its worth deteriorates. But the metal scene is downstream of that. And people just have less money to spend. So most countries that I went to, even though Ireland is a strange outlier, but most countries we went to, we were told, well, this X band used to pull 400 people, they're now pulling 180, 170. We haven't done many club shows for the new album with Primordial, which is mainly be doing festivals. And I can see that there's a downturn even in our club shows. You have to stack the lineup, you have to make it very interesting and very specific. And also, when I followed links to some of the gigs with Deserted Fear, which, as a lineup didn't really work. But, it is what it was. You follow the link to the tickets and you find, wow, €42. Nobody should be paying €42 to see Primordial. And whose fault is this? But there's like €15 of add-ons to the original ticket price, which maybe is 27. And this is just, again, the Ticketmasterization of all of these things. Not that the tickets were run by Ticketmaster, but all of these add-ons, it just happens to everything. Whether you're booking a flight, luggage has gone up. Or they change the rules so as you can't bring on your carry-on and you have to put it in the hole and you've got to pay more. It's what some people would call the marginal gains of late-stage capitalism, where you as a customer have literally no rights, particularly anymore, and you're just you're held hostage to whatever the whims of whatever company it is you're dealing with. You want customer service? Doesn't exist anymore. And I would argue has disappeared since lockdown. You want to try and find something or speak to a representative or speak to anybody to help you out? Nah, forget it. It's been outsourced to somewhere else and they just don't answer the phone. Whatever it is, you know what I'm talking about. But the cost of doing business, let's start with small labels who have to order vinyls. The import duty on those, ordering 300, 400, 500 vinyls is more expensive than it was. There's often new tariffs imposed, I guess, to use a Trumpian word. He does love the word tariff, or whatever. Wow, that was an interesting. I even did a little hand gesture there. No good to you, listening to a podcast. But the wholesale rates on vinyl have gone up. Of course, what is vinyl made of? It's made of oil, it's made of plastics, and all of the costs of those things, oil has gone up. Yeah, everything is downstream of all of these costs. Now, some will say, oh, it's the war in Ukraine, it's this, it's that, it's the other. It's many different things. But it's also, latent greed on behalf of the whole, corporate multinational world who have seen their profits, we're in the middle of an energy crisis. But energy companies, go and check the profit margins they have, and they're greater than they were before because they control the supply and the demand now. So smaller labels which used to depend on singular orders. You probably noticed we have a Tower Records in Dublin, still surviving. It's a cool building. It's a nice to go in and walk around. But vinyls that were 18 to 20 to €22 pre-lockdown are now 40, 45, 50, 55. An almost 100% increase. And it's the same with everything. So if you're a band and you're bringing vinyl, you've probably noticed Primordial doesn't have a mail order anymore because it kind of got pointless. The system would lose 1 in every or 2 in every 10 vinyls. So that's your profit margin. And we realized we would have had to sell them online for 75, 60, €80 to make something of a profit, which is divisible by 5, unless you just put it back into making other things. And for small labels, this is how they're struggling. The one-on-one orders have disappeared. Because if you are making, doing a minimum wage job, and let's, be straight, wages haven't increased in most Western countries in 20, 25 years, especially in a country like Ireland, for example. People, they live to work, so to speak. They don't work and they're not able to, save and afford a house. And, but that's not what this podcast is about. Let's stick to music and stick to heavy metal. And so the underground is suffering because these singular orders are disappearing because people are going, I would really like, I was just listening to around the corner. I was doing my grocery shopping. I was listening to the new Deus Mortem album. I'm quite the fan. Polish band. Thanatos it's called. And I thought to myself, I wouldn't mind ordering that. And I thought to myself, I wouldn't mind ordering the new Poison Ruin album. This great sort of punk post-core band from New York. And when I added it all up online, to order both vinyls this morning would have cost me the guts of €100. And of course, if you're working a job and you're earning €300 or €400, €500, a week, and that's, you're maybe listening to me in countries where that sounds incredibly extravagant, and like a lot of money. It's all relative to where you live, but people just don't have that spare money anymore. So that spare money that was there 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 years ago. I remember talking to friends of mine who were working stalls at small festivals, boutique festivals. The Chaos Descends, as an example, I always pick them because it's one of my favorite places, one of my favorite festivals. German festival in Crispendorf. I did watch Sun, while on some sort of hallucinogen on a toy train. Yes, they have a train that goes around the periphery of the festival ground and watching sun while sitting on the little train. High point. Anyway, I digress, as is my wont. But the numbers that those small underground labels were posting of sales back in the day are nothing compared to that. And so how do they survive when they're relying on single order, somebody to drop 40, 50 euro on just a vinyl? So that's one thing. That's how labels are struggling. And a lot of the bigger labels were doing very well during lockdown because people didn't have anything to do with their money and they didn't know how long it was going to last. And so when lockdown started, a lot of the bigger labels took a huge upsurge in mail order stuff. And then that sort of died away as people kind of got sick of the novelty of it. And now by and large, unless you're diversifying with very particular bespoke articles, like if you're lucky enough to have 500 committed fans who will buy a very expensive piece of bespoke band paraphernalia, like a wooden box with a key in it or something. I remember Alcest, the beloved Alcest, when we toured with them 10 years ago or whatever it was, they had this wooden box with a key and like a cutting of leaves or something in it and a handwritten note from Liège. I can, am I moistening your gusset, ladies? Listen, there were people fighting over them at the merch stand and they were maybe 60, 70 euro. Now they would be 200, 250 euro. And if you sold them one by one, hand numbered, that's the only way as a band you can really make anything from merchandise anymore. And are you selling your soul a little bit by making such bespoke pieces? I don't think so. And I think for people who love a band dearly, they like to have beautiful things to own by them. I mean, I'm sitting here and I can see on the wall, it's not quite the same, but I see an original Bathory Bloodfire Death picture disc framed on the wall. I have this record maybe 5 times. That's not actually a very good example. Anyway, look, it doesn't matter. But you get my point. Merch sales are just way down for bands. And this is basically everything is kind of just down because people have less money. Postage is just killing small labels. And I also do wonder if the new generation of younger fans, it's the law of diminishing returns. There seems less and less younger fans than there was 10 or 15 or 20 years ago. And they're certainly buying less vinyl. They seem less interested in the physical stuff. That vinyl trend that was everywhere in the underground, where people were basically, how can we say, people were fighting each other at little merch stalls to get the new Balzer mini album before it sold out. I'm not sure that that's happening anymore. I think that the newer generation of underground people are less interested in the physical stuff. Oh, there's a double entendre for you. Or maybe it's a single entendre. I'm not sure. Answers on a postcard. I would also say traveling, the cost of traveling has really changed things. Flight costs. Certainly most bands who have tried to increase their fees, medium bands I'm talking about. I mean, we've often talked about in political terms that what's happened during lockdown and afterwards was the evisceration of the middle class. And some would say that that's been an ongoing pursuit of the sort of technocratic multinational institutions that we live under, is to basically force the middle class down into becoming like a new serfdom, a new working class, digital serf, so to speak. And I think there is something in that a sort of war on the middle class and their aspirations has been happening. And certainly the era of cheap flight is over. I don't think it's going back to something reasonable. Of course, you can still get a cheap flight if you pick a really peripheral airline and you go into off-season and you go on a Tuesday and come back on a Wednesday. It is possible. I mean, hey, I've been looking, I entertain myself sometimes by just staring at Ryanair and putting in configurations, and I go, God, you could go to Marrakesh in 3 days for €29. Go, etc., etc. But try and fly in and out as a band for a weekend, and you'll notice the costs are 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 800. We were quoted €720 single to go from Frankfurt to Stockholm if you saw us at the very great Manigarm Open Air, one of the best shows of the whole summer, which is the reason why we had to take the 5:50 a.m. flight and have no sleep from the night before. everything just feels frenetic. And there's so many festivals and there's so much stuff happening. I was only discussing this with Dara from Invictus, who might come on and have a little bit of a chat about this kind of thing. You may have noticed, as an aside, I haven't had many Irish people from the Irish scene on. And I think that was in the beginning to distinguish the podcast from other Irish podcasts and just sort of set the tone that it was not just, jobs for the boys, so to speak. So maybe now is the time to start having a little chat with maybe Morning Beloved and some other people. We'll see how that works out. But certainly the cost of moving a band from one city to another has become insane. We've been quoted wild prices for somebody with a van to just pick us up and drive us for 2 hours. And this could be like a €500-600 cost. So everybody is looking for more of everything from everyone. And because shit runs downhill, bands are always at the bottom of it. And many of them are indeed making less than they were 5 or 10 years ago. Now, how sustainable is that? Because I think, and I've been talking with Guts from Deaf Forever a little bit about it, is that, of course, lockdown, bands and musicians couldn't play, and there was a frenetic kind of wild rush to get back out there, which I totally understand. But now it's like we've reached some sort of critical mass again where there's just so many festivals and they can't all succeed and work out. There's got to be quite a few misses incoming. And sometimes now we get offers and we have to ask, is this the first edition of this festival? We're going to need more of a deposit than we would have normally asked for, because the feeling is amongst the booking agents and the booking agency world. By the way, I do some booking for Dragon Productions, Miss Thirming and a bunch of other bands. The feeling is like that everything is burgeoning and moving and getting wider and wider and wider. And like every small town now has some sort of festival. And we played plenty of them this summer. Many of them were great. Ones that I was really, kind of going, fucking hell, there's a, small festival in the Basque Country. How's this going to do? Brilliant. 800-900 people. But is it sustainable in the long run? Are we going to crash and burn a bit? Are we going to reach some critical mass? Now, Kieran from Primordial said to me, have you any positive things to say? And he had a point. We're sitting in the van driving somewhere. And I get it. He's been in a band with me for over 3 decades. He's learned to tune my frequency out. To just not listen to me and not hear my my whinging, complaining voice. And I've said to him, well, I suppose you're right. Negative stuff is more interesting though, isn't it? Nobody tunes in to go, hey, the sun is shining outside. The podcast is called Agitators Anonymous, is it not? But I thought about it and I went, well, I suppose superficially, festival culture in heavy metal and the underground, and more so than almost any other kinds of music, is, superficially, well, maybe not superficially, but looking in from the outside, it looks very strong. Your inbox, if you're a band who are in any sort of demand, or you want to get in a camper van and travel around every weekend and go to a different festival for 4 months, you could, and it could take you all the way from the Balkans to to northern Norway to back down to Spain. There's just festivals everywhere. So theoretically, if you're a well-organized band, like I use the example of the band Schizophrenia, kind of up-and-coming thrash band. They got their van, they got their merch, they got their stuff. They're willing to drive and put in the hard hours. You can build yourself up. You can. It is possible. It's difficult, though. So, those are it's the economy, stupid, is making it very hard for underground labels to kind of succeed. I think the ability to go viral has changed. I was talking about this with Adi from Solstafir. And even I see this with our own videos we made for the last Primordial album. The numbers compared to the videos for, which were always 500,000 to 1 million views, respectable for videos before. They're now, they sit at 100 to 200,000. Some of you watched the really, really cool Blood Incantation big long form video. I have a feeling if that was 10 years ago, that would have been in a couple of millions by now. Instead, it's a couple of 100,000. The ability to go viral for bands seems to, with the exception of awful stuff that's based on computer game songs or some awful kind of I'm not going to say the names of the bands because I'll have to wash my mouth out afterwards, but what goes viral has changed, and maybe that's because younger people I have this theory. Well, it's not really a theory, I suppose. It's younger people are resonating with smaller clips on TikTok. And so the kind of people who were making a video go viral in 2010 are now older, and they're not watching YouTube videos of songs. Maybe they're going to see Solstice, who are going on tour next week. Actually, I think they're on tour now. They're not as interested, whereas the things that are going viral are small TikTok stuff. And let's be honest, TikTok is like, I think it's the enemy of art and creativity and music, reducing things to 15, 20, 30-second sound bites. And I'm sure there are things that are going viral on those terms that we know nothing about. So for certain bands of a certain generation and vintage and artistic production who want to make a long-form video that's tied into an album, the ability to go viral has really changed. Even the ability to make an album. And of course, an album is the monolith of creativity for a band. But I look back now and I think when I look at how it ends, the last Primordial, I think we should have kept 2 songs off it and released them 3 and 6 months after the album was released to spike interest again. And it's a horrible way to think, because the algorithm is moving you to consider things like that. But in the long run, it would help the other songs on the album at the back end of it, the 7th and 8th and 9th tracks, because I can see the statistics and there's plenty of you who don't get to song 7, 8 and 9. So maybe take them out and release them months later with a lo-fi video, and it would spike the whole thing. And I think that's what people are realistically doing. They just keep releasing EPs. I love this band from Ukraine, Svr. Don't know anything about them, deliberately haven't looked into it, but they release an EP literally every 6 to 8 weeks, it looks like. And I've watched them go from like 600 monthly listeners to now, I think it's over 25,000. That's how you grow your digital numbers. And it's it makes me feel a bit to discuss things like that, because you are an artist, you want to make your album, you want to put out a piece of art, but you do have to play the game. And whether you like it or not, for a band like Primordial, who and I've talked about this with many bands over the summer who are in the same vintage as us, whether it's Moonspell or whatever, there comes a moment where you are, you've plateaued, you're not going to grow, you're not going to get bigger, and you age into becoming a legacy band. And it's up to you how you curate your legacy. It's just, whether you like it or not, you can rage against the dying of the light, but you aren't the concern of, and you're not an up and coming thing anymore. A band of young men. You've ceased to be that. And that was the realization, the biggest realization for me this year was like, okay, I don't see chartable growth for the first time in ages. And many other bands have seen that 5 and 10 years ago. And it's about curating your legacy. So from now on, Primordial will play next year the whole of The Gathering Wilderness, maybe the whole of Spirit the Flame, the whole of To the Name Instead. Then we made the records, we can do what we want with them. And I don't feel like it's giving in to the algorithm. But in the final stretch of the band, well, why not? Because realistically, are you going to be doing it in 10 years? I really don't know. And this is what happens. Our scene is aging. It's moving into middle age. I mean, considering the terms going viral, I would imagine that the number of views on, let's say, the newer Behemoth songs, are they the same as they were 10 years ago? No, probably I should have had a look at that. But one thing I've also noticed is that for all of the newer bands in the last 5, 10, 15 years, they all feel like they need a gimmick or some sort of hoods or hats or outfits. And I think you can see that's reflected in the whole popularity of this Heilung kind of scene where everyone looks like a character from Skyrim or a computer game, or from Game of Thrones, or from the visual aspect of trying to create that viral moment where everybody is sharing a small clip or a reel. This is something that almost all new bands try and get a handle on. And it seems to me that this is almost a consideration before the music sometimes. And that's just because everything has shifted to this more visual world, this more visual scene. And just being, a bunch of guys standing there, just, Metallica in 1984, for the most part, is not aspirational when it comes to trying to get eyeballs on your band. Not ears, but eyeballs. And I think that's the difference, is that younger bands, it's all about the eyeballs and what they're doing, as opposed to, well, not all, of course, but at least when it in terms of the mainstream are trying to become popular, most of them feel that that's something that they have to do. And I think that that is something that's profound within society. We've become, despite, long-form podcasts and people listening to people chatting, which is in the other podcast I recorded yesterday where I mentioned the same thing, It's the Economy Stupid, about how podcasters have become friend simulators. You can hear that next week, I imagine. But the idea that music has become very much a visual attachment. It's something people are now looking at clips on their phone. Like I said, I went to see Batushka. Ultimas was playing, and even just the setup of the band, the Russian Orthodox vibes, 40, 50, 60 people were filming just the setup and the intro and stuff, and you realize they're all filming that, they're all live streaming it, they're all reposting it, they're all sending it to their friend going, fucking hell, wait till you see this. And that's what moves the digital algorithm for younger people. Are going, fucking hell, look at this. And that's how Batushka, it's a bad example, but it's an example, or one of those bands. It's something Ghost understood very, very well, is that you have your stage show, your setup, your whatever you want to say. If it's something that makes people instantly get out their phone, and this always makes me kind of feel a bit grubby discussing, because this is not the way I was brought up. It's not the way of the underground. It's not the way of artists, that they need to constantly lean into, novelty or lean into a silly hat. But it's just, I think it's a reasonable comment to make on where the scene and the music industry is right now. But for bands of a certain generation, they are aging. There's nothing you can do. I mean, if Dismember played in Dublin, I imagine there'd probably be 500 or 600 people. Gatecreeper just played in Dublin to about 500 people. Now, Gatecreeper sounds very much like Indecent and Obscene by Dismember. Is that going to be the same crowd who go to both? It's not. There is a reinvention there, and there is some crossover, and probably Gatecreeper could support some of those bigger, older death metal bands. I can see them supporting Obituary and it being cool, or Cannibal stuff, and being reintroduced to some of the older people. And older death metal guys will go, fucking hell, that was great. Let's go and see them. So it does happen, but it just does feel that for a certain generation, they are now moving through the scene, and people are interested in different kinds of things now. Michael from Seasons of Mist, he would, in his hyperbolic way, he would pronounce, nobody is listening to heavy metal anymore. It's all dying on the vine. I must get him on the podcast, actually. He would be a very interesting combatant and interview subject. But that's kind of where he comes from sometimes, is that all of the growth is not in these traditional forms. And I've said this to a couple of people. It feels like the things linked to traditional metal are shrinking, that it's about curating what you have left. You're not really growing. You're not really breaking out anymore. There's not really any breakout songs, so to speak. There are, of course, newer, younger bands who are doing really, really well, but they tend not to be linked to this traditional kind of element of heavy metal, and that seems to be shrinking. Also, as I said, I alluded to before, the terms of socializing, the social engagement, the scene, which was the stuff that surrounded the gig, which was the hanging out, which was the having a drink, trying to get laid, getting into trouble, having a laugh, all the social aspects. Whether anybody likes it or not, heavy metal is downstream of all of those trends that are moving through society in general. And young people are saying that their first, relationships are online, their socializing is online, and they're kind of living in an atomized moment in society. And I don't think it's going to change. And so, you will know what it's like. You've gone to see some band or other and you realize, fucking hell, everyone is here is 50 plus. There's nothing wrong with that. Your audience is your audience. But what nobody really likes to hear, but I think it's true, is that lockdown, and especially lockdown, was a full stop at the end of a long chapter for many people when it came to all of the things we discussed, being actively part of a scene. And there are a lot of people who just disappeared or went, you know what? I don't think I really want to be down the pub anymore or down the club anymore. And, that's okay. That's your choice. But what it does is it makes the pub and the club difficult to keep going, because it doesn't have any form of reinvention. Like many of you who've been to Dublin will have know the Phil Lynott statue outside Brussels, which is, the oldest rock bar in the city. But I'm sorry to report, but if you go down to Brussels on a Saturday night at midnight, there might be 8 people there. There might be 10 people there. There might be 6 people there. That's the truth. There just isn't socially, an alternative culture in the city is almost dead as a social force. People just don't go out and take part anymore. They go to gigs, and that's fine. But by 10:30, most people have just gone home and gone back to their hovels in the ground or under bridges or wherever it is where they inhabit. And that's sort of what's happened to the scene. And of course, then bars close, and maybe that bar has a stage in the corner. So when some small band who needs, a 50 to 100 size place to play, there is nowhere to play. And anybody who will attest to having to try and book a gig on a Saturday night for 100, 120, 150 people in a city will know there is 6 to 9 to 12 month waiting list, because so many of the venues have just been shorn off, have disappeared, have been closed down, have never reopened. And they can't reopen because they just sort of, the overheads have got greater. I didn't mention this before, but the insurance of everything has become greater. The insurance of putting on a festival, the insurance of paying security for your festival, the insurance of opening a bar. There was a moment after the crash in 2008 where there was a lot of BYOB, bring your own beer, kind of punk rock style spaces opened up, DIY venues in Dublin. And there were, you could go to a place with a bag of beer and see a D-beat band in the corner play. And it was a great vibe, but it just fell apart and didn't last long. And slowly all those buildings all got bought by multinational foreign investment firms who were either going to level them or just have them sit empty and use them as, sort of financial investments. I think you've heard in the podcast, you've heard of the kind of people I've been told saying do that, or they became owned by the Troika, I guess, or foreign, debtor firms. Or the establishment just got sick of what was happening and went, you're out, get out of here. Because we could make these into very expensive apartments, or we can, with the whole top empty, blah, blah, blah. Look, you know what I mean. So I just thought it would be interesting, coming to the end of this ramble now, just a little look at where the scene is. On one, if you're being, let's take the healthy side of it first, there's a lot of people making music. There's a lot of bands out there. It's getting more diverse. There's good singular artists out there. There's this whole interesting pagan new tribal movement, which is really sort of interesting. Lots of bands from different countries. Lots of bands are touring South America, going to play Mexico. There is a sort of globalist view of everything that is opening up, and hopefully bands are going to start to play in Africa, or there is something broad happening, where the broad church of heavy metal seems to be sort of opening up. And that's if I was to put on my optimistic hat and say something positive to Kieran when he's going, will you say something positive, will you? And then, of course, there's all the micro cosmic stuff below that, which is part of the nuts and bolts of the underground, which are finding it very hard to survive. And I think maybe if you take the first positive comment, those positive things can be they're a bit like window dressing. And maybe it's window dressing for a corporate ideal. I don't know. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. Let me know your opinions. If you know somebody who would love this podcast or hate it, share it with them. If you don't understand what I'm saying, but just like the sound of my voice, good for you. All right. Planet Satan, Agitators Anonymous, over and out, my friends. See you next week.